Hey, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the Experience This Show. I'm your host, Dan Gingiss, customer experience speaker, author, podcaster, and coach. And I'm very happy to have you here this week, as I am every week. I want to remind you that we are getting really close. I mean, I am getting so excited to unleash this into the world. It is the Experience Maker, how to create remarkable experiences that your customers can't wait to share. It is available for pre-order now at all of your favorite bookstores and will be live September 14th. If you go to my website at dangingiss.com and click on the book, you will see that we're offering some very special bonuses for people that pre-order the book that you will only get while it is a pre-order. So definitely check it out, and very excited for people to see this book. Hey, I'm also excited to invite somebody onto the show today. He's a new friend of mine at an old company. So a company that I've worked with before that was all over my first book, Winning at Social Customer Care. The company's called Conversational, and their Senior Director of Product Marketing and Partnerships is Jason Valdina. Welcome, Jason.
Hello, sir. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Hey, my pleasure. Very excited for you to be here. Tell me a little bit about you and Conversational.
Yeah. So, as you said, Jason Valdina, Conversational. So, if you're not familiar with Conversational, we've been around for nearly a decade, and we are solely focused on messaging. And really, our focus is on enabling brands to deliver exceptional conversational experiences across messaging channels. So these are things like WhatsApp, WeChat, Twitter DM, Apple Business Chat, Google's Business Messages, and the like. So we've really focused on that, as well as public social media. And Dan and I crossed paths a number of times on the public social media stages around the world, especially in North America. And happy to join today.
So, Jason, when I first got involved with Conversational, after all, it's in the name, it was really focused on social media and customer service in social media. But over time, consumers have expanded their preferences for how they want to talk with companies, and you guys have expanded your services accordingly. Can you talk a little bit about that journey and that expansion, and where are we right now?
Yeah, I think there's always these galvanizing moments, and you've seen them too, and you've been talking about them a lot. I expect this new book of yours to be chock full of these kind of anecdotes, but I think there's three milestones. There's three major things that have happened in my journey to messaging, and I think they very much align with the way Conversational has approached messaging. I started really, my first foray into the messaging world was in probably 2006 with a company called SendWordNow, which is now OnSolve. And it was a fairly nerdy way to get exposed to messaging. It was around emergency broadcast messaging. So this was push only in an emergency. And at SendWordNow or OnSolve, we were doing okay. There were security experts around the world that were buying our software, but it was like the tsunami in Southeast Asia happened, and all these businesses that were multinationals that had employees there suddenly were like, "Oh my God, we need a way to let customers, let employees know that they're okay, find out who's where, who needs help." So that was a galvanizing moment. I think in the early 2000s, 2011, 2012, we as a company kind of came into existence because there was, this groundswell of an audience that had finally arrived at social media. It was no longer a fad, and customers started to kind of, water seeks its own level, and customers that were usually pretty disgruntled found their way on social media. And it became this big echo chamber to say, this company sucks and they're not treating me right, and trying to publicly shame companies into doing the right thing. And Dan, I know you've been at the forefront of that battle for years. And so were we. So our platform really started as a social media, sort of monitoring and listening, but around action. So allowing brands to see the hot spots and where customers are really, struggling, and honestly, tarnishing their name, and allowing agents and bots to sort of engage there. And some point around 2017, I think the second or third big inflection point that we saw was on our platform, and I think it was pretty indicative of the rest of the world. We had a pretty good global sample set of businesses where around somewhere halfway through 2017, we saw this point where public social media kind of flatlined, and suddenly private messaging, one-to-one messaging, eclipsed that volume of social media, and that's continued to happen. But I think the fourth inflection point, we're trying not to talk about pandemia today, but the pandemic last year was, I'm sure, Dan, I know I've read some of your stuff about this already. Like, it I don't think anybody could have forecasted how that would have pushed customers to be fiercely digital and only digital out of necessity. And so messaging has, we've seen it just absolutely explode in a good way. But by necessity, I think brands have really had to pay attention there because that's where customers went. They were home, their mobile phone was their lifeline. Desktop was great, but they couldn't sit in front of it all the time. They have kids at home and trying to homeschool and all this crazy stuff. So I think, we've seen that we've been trying to sort of help brands forecast and get ready for that. We never imagined that would be the galvanizing moment. But I think where we're at now this year, going into 2022, I think brands are now trying to figure out how do I get my whole brand? How do I get the whole brand to represent itself on messaging properly?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I see this happening for a couple of reasons. I think, first of all, as you pointed out, when customers got a voice in social media for the first time, they used it, and they used it to demand better experiences and, frankly, to complain a lot. I think over time, thanks to companies like yours and businesses being equipped to respond really well and really quickly on social media, I do think that one of the shifts was that people said, man, this is actually a pretty good channel for me to have customer service engagement because it's fast, it's easy, I can do it on my own time, I don't have to wait on hold, I don't have to sit and stare at a chat agent typing, you sit there with that ... And so I think social really moved from that channel of last resort to the channel of first resort. And then as social continued to evolve, messaging became sort of an obvious follow-on because Facebook Messenger, Instagram Messenger, Twitter DMs, DMs in LinkedIn, it became a way of communicating with people. And your founder, Joshua March, was ahead of this, with his book, Message Me, which has now got to be quite a few years old.
Yeah, almost 3 years old now, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that he saw this coming and was absolutely correct in that. And then you sort of take it one more step further to say, as you mentioned, we're all on phones. The way that we communicate with friends and family is through texting and through our phone. So why not communicate with companies in the same way? It's convenient. We all know how to use it. You don't have to teach grandma and grandpa how to do it because they already know how to text, and so I think there's some ease there. What happens, though, as you start to expand channels, invariably in larger companies? Now you're going across different parts of the organization, different teams, maybe led by different VPs and what have you. You get into the old silo problem. How are you guys seeing that and dealing with it?
You really do. Yeah, I think there's two things there. One is that there's, I think the channels have, the bigger the organization gets and the older the organization gets, I think those two things are important. The more fiefdoms get involved with how the brand represents itself, how it communicates with customers. And with that, the baggage of an older mentality of, a non-customer centricity sort of approach where, some brands force customers to use their channel. So customers have to come to the brand and they have to communicate on their terms. You have to email this address. You have to go on our website and use this chat widget. You have to call this hotline, not that one. And none of those things the customer owns. So the difference is with social media, and I think you're totally spot on. I think one of the most interesting phenomenons about messaging is that it is sort of born out of social. The first companies to really do take SMS on the side and BlackBerry Pin, if anybody remembers what that is. But take those things, the telecom stuff out of the picture. The social media companies, Twitter DM, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, these things really were the first consumer-first messaging platforms. They weren't, no brand owned it as their only way to communicate, right? And it's not like, H&M had their own messenger and everybody had to go download that and use it, and they would use it with their friends. Like, that's absurd, right? So, but it was born out of this idea, like, well, there's public chatter and people want to have private conversations. How do we build that? So they built these apps and they're messaging apps, and that's a very personal space. I think the growth of that just being that it's already a way people are communicating with friends and family. And then I think this year, the biggest change we saw is that there's now an expectation that brands are there. We do, and Dan, I know you're a big fan of this stuff. We love the fact you always help us promote it as well. We have two kind of franchises that we do every year. And some of you live today have probably seen this stuff. So one's called the Definitive Guide to Customer Experience, and another one's called the State of CX. And so both those reports are research that we run. It's across North America and Western EU and UK. And the Conversational marketing team does an amazing job of this every year. And we just published one about 2 months ago. And the stat was, I'm going to pull it up right now. It was that the question we asked, this is our senior director of marketing, Harry Rollison, put this one as the first one. It was like, do you feel your customers have a higher expectations of digital engagement than they did a year ago? And 94% people said yes. And that shouldn't shock anyone. But the difference there is that I think that the tables have turned, that people, especially in a time when everybody was forced to be home and it was hard to get access to anything and everything had to be remote for a period of time, the brands that didn't acquiesce, the brands that didn't start speaking with customers on their terms in the channels they preferred have lost. And I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but I feel like the difference between live chat and telephony versus messaging is that it's the brands forcing you to communicate with them on their terms versus the brands trying to acquiesce and communicate in a way customers already are, right?
Yeah, first of all, I love that report. We'll put that QR code up one more time here. If people want to scan it, go check it out. This is truly one of my favorite reports of the year. I'm not just saying that because you're here. I probably cited this report 15 times in my first book, and I've been definitely reading through the 2021 version. Really, really cool stuff. I think that, you mentioned kind of being where the customer is and acquiescing. I love, and in my new book, I make this point because it's absurd. No time in the history of customer service has anybody called up a toll-free number and the person answers and says, "Hi, would you mind tweeting us instead?" That would never happen. And yet when people tweet or people go to message or people go to email, they say, "Well, we'd like to serve you on a different channel. Could you call us instead? Or could you email us instead?" No, I can't. I want you to be here in the channel that I'm in. And right now I'm in Twitter, and that's how I want to communicate with you. And so the absurdity of it in reverse, I never quite understood why it didn't feel as absurd the way that we see it a lot, which is, no, thank you. We don't want you to tweet. Will you please call us? It's absurd, isn't it?
It is totally absurd. And I think a lot of that, again, this goes back to something you mentioned earlier, which is that channels currently, and this is one of the biggest struggles, I think, no matter what channel you're focused on, channels right now are thought of as owned by a specific discipline or a specific department in a company. And I think as someone who, like yourself, who's been, really championing the idea of a consistent, uniform customer experience for a brand, consistency in tone of voice, consistency in what you will and won't do for customers. Channels right now, and too many companies, our own customers too. If you're on here, I'm looking at you. I think that there's too many times where the marketing team owns. In our universe, the marketing team owns Twitter, but customer service owns, Apple Business Chat and Google's business messaging. For some reason, it's arbitrary. I think some of this comes out of like old world contact center stuff where you had the phone people and the live chat people, and they didn't want to share budget and they didn't want to share information with each other. We've seen that for years. But I think now it's really about, as you said, I think where a customer contacts you first is clearly what they preferred, right? That's what they went there, and if they reached out, even if it's not the most preferred way, it was at the time most convenient. And it's probably going to maintain consistency, in terms of being convenient for them. And so, one of the things we preach is that if someone comes in through telephony, okay, keep them there. But if you have a long wait time, if the option they've selected in their IVR is not something that you're really prepared to address, maybe now is the time to say, hey, if you don't want to hold, Dan, we can probably better serve you on Facebook Messenger or the messaging, channel of your choice, and we'll get back to you when we have a chance. But we're seeing 26, 28, 29% deflection rates when brands offer that. That's pretty big. That's awesome. Nearly 30% of call volume. People are proactively saying, yeah, I don't want to wait on holds. I don't want to do this. And they're willing to bet that the messaging experience will be asynchronous. It'll be more convenient for them. And so there's exceptions, is what I'm saying. Is that the idea of keeping someone in a channel is important unless you're inconveniencing them by keeping them in that channel, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I love about that is you're giving the customer choice. You're not saying we're going to hang up on you if you choose to hold, right? We're saying you can hold or you can go here. I wonder over time if you start to see a permanent deflection rate. So do they go over to Messenger and then they say, hey, this is so much better. I'm never calling again. I'm always going to use Messenger. I would think it may be hard to track, but I would think over time you might start to see that, which of course is a great money saver for the company, plus a better experience for the customer. So it's a win-win.
Yeah.
We have a comment from a friend of ours and former guest of the show, Sarah Grace.
Sarah,
McCann.
oh my God.
Hi, Dan and Jason. Messaging, one of my favorite topics, and digital touchpoints / options critical to CX strategy for every industry. Absolutely. And Sarah was on the show back in April of this year. And that it reminds me that I don't ever talk about this, but you can go to my website and either on the top navigation or just go directly to the Experience Maker show, and you can find all of the previous episodes. And we are we're at something like 73, 74 episodes at this point, all nice. Interviewing amazing people like you, Jason and Sarah Grace. And so if you do want to go back and look at old episodes, definitely check it out.
I'm going to go check out Sarah's for sure.
Well, she dropped a lot of knowledge bombs as usual. So, Jason, what are we briefly touched on the pandemic, and obviously, everything changed forever. Yeah, everything changed with the pandemic. But as we're now, getting to the point where we're starting to feel past it, variants notwithstanding, what are you looking at as we start to look towards the end of 21, beginning of 22? What sort of, if you had your crystal ball, what do you think is happening next?
Well, I think a couple of trends that we're seeing, I guess, are one that up until let's say now being past 12 to 15 months, because I think it's made us all lose track of time. So it's almost like it didn't happen. But I think the past year and a half, what we're seeing is that previously brands, if they were invested in messaging and they were really serious about it, they were serious about it insofar as being somewhat reactive and being more focused on customer service use cases. And why is that? And this goes back to like fiefdoms and ownership. So a lot of the social media teams that worked with Conversational a couple of years ago started to move into messaging on their own, or by some prompting from us. But they've seen huge value in terms of higher CSAT, better customer experience, lower cost to serve, and all that stuff. But I think what's happened is that service has reached this plateau. That the brands that have invested have leaned into service, and then in the past 12 to 15 months, they were forced to think, what else can we do here on this surface in this real estate? How do I reach out to my partners across service, across sales, across marketing? The lion's share of our customer audience is here now. What do we do about that? Not like it's a crisis, but they realize that we're only doing service here. And to your point earlier, we're telling people, oh, if you want to contact us about a product information, you can call the hotline or whatever it might be. So they're trying to avoid channel switching. So I think we're starting to see brands to take that channel switching, the say no to channel switching mantra, I think, a little more seriously. And we're seeing more brands branch out from support. At the same time, there's this weird sort of tracks crossing where we have other customers, and I think even if they're not a customer, we've seen brands that went into the messaging world solely focused on revenue generation. So they were only looking to boost sales. They were only looking for new customer acquisition. And if you needed help, again, you were told to email here, call there, do whatever. They only had a bot. They had no agents behind it. And so I think the way we've approached the market by really teaching some of the biggest brands in the world to say, it's not just about bots, it's not just about an agent experience on messaging, but it's the magic of bringing the two together. That alone has brought different disciplines within the organization together. It's brought different teams together. So if you're building a bot, you might get your CIO involved and maybe you have an internal development team. Maybe you have an outsourced sort of agency that you work with, and we'll have them build it with Conversational. So we see that. But I think what that's done is now force people to say, we want to own the KPI. We want to own the goal. We want to own the strategy. the channel, we should all be there. We should all figure out how to sort of orchestrate and how to not stumble over each other, because this is where the customer prefers to be. We already proved that. And I'm not saying that we proved that, although I feel like Conversational has proved that. But a lot of our customers have found that, like, it's been a 2, 3, 4, 5-year battle internally to say, hey, everyone, whoever everyone is, look at what we're able to achieve on public social, on private messaging. And how does this compare to chat? We have brands like Volaris Airlines who, the second half of this year, they are killing voice entirely. I mean, that's
Wow.
fierce. That is a fierce move. And that's not a rash move. That's 3.5 years. By the time they do it, it'll be 4 years of continual A/B testing. First, they went after email. They went after chat. They did a split A/B test for 6 months between chat and Messenger and WhatsApp. And they found that, chat was 83% more expensive for them. Just that session-based, single-threaded, I can't work on anything else except for this conversation kind of paradigm was not working for them. So I think that we're seeing more and more brands say, okay, how do we really double down here? I think the other bit is that there's more opportunity. There's a lot of untapped opportunity to drive customer acquisition through messaging. I think moving away from that service use case, it's happening mostly in places where people have proved, they found proof in the pudding for customer service, and now they've gotten like the groundswell of the organization to say, okay, yeah, like let's try some sales experiments. But my crystal ball just says that's going into 2022. We're going to see a lot more brands do that. I think there's too many brands, even within our own customer portfolio, that watch some of their competitors do that over the past 12 to 15 months. And there's been big dividends there. So it's a big game. And I think, the other thing I would say, the last thing I would say about just the crystal ball thing is, have you heard about Google's business messages? They're doing, they're going to actually have Google ads that link directly to messaging experiences. Have you seen that at all?
Yeah. I've heard of it. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
It's relatively new. It's sort of being piloted now. We're partnered with Google on it. So we have 1 or 2 brands that are, piloting that experience. But that whole paradigm, I mean, LivePerson tried to do this 5, 6, 7 years ago. This has been, a long awaited move. And I think being able as a brand to actually have most brands are actually doing some sort of AdWords advertising, right? It's Google. So the idea that brands can now say, hey, let me drive somebody into the bot I already built so I can, drive more ROI from that bot build. But I have agents sitting there. I can have, that bot can hand over to an agent, and we can have a conversation with somebody directly from a Google search result. It's amazing. Facebook, one of the things we've seen is that there's a lot more spending around click-to-messenger ads. And so brands are now starting to ad spend on trying to get people to, I don't think they're thinking about it as deflection, but they're trying to promote specific conversational experiences, and they're putting money behind it. So I think there's going to be more. I think Twitter is going to do more there. I expect some of these companies to start coming up with their own ways for brands to pay to drive that surface in front of customers, for sure.
Yeah, it's a fascinating use case, and I think it makes sense because if you sort of look at the common thread there, it is engagement and establishing relationships. It's not just sending someone to a landing page and hope they're going to buy. It's being there to answer the question for them, to prod them along, et cetera, and to establish that relationship. I tell B2B clients all the time, people buy from who they like. And you're not selling to a building or an ivory tower. You're selling to a person, and that person's a consumer, and they're used to dealing with consumer brands. And so, like it or not, that's what you're being compared to.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thought, actually.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I went out to dinner last night and had amazing service. The waiter was paid such good attention to us and refilled our water all these times, and really made us feel like we were special. Now I come to work today, and that's my last experience. So I kind of expect that out of my next experience, right? And that next experience might be in B2B, but I still expect the person to treat me well and to value me like that waiter did last night.
I love that, though, because the notion of comparing your experience on one channel to how you would converse with somebody that you like, that's a friend of yours, right? I love that, because I think a lot of what we tend to talk about when we talk about the values of messaging, one of them is this idea that there's this persistent thread. There's conversational history. And for the consumer, what that means is like, my colleagues know I'm a big snowboard fanatic. And Burton Snowboards up in Vermont, they still have their headquarters up there. I had this amazing thread with them like 2 years ago where I was complaining. Had a problem with a product I had just bought, and something wrong with it. And I had this multi-day long thread, intradaily, sending pictures back and forth. And here's how you fix it, Jason. We have this other part. Here's the SKU. And I still look back at that thread because it's in my phone, in Messenger, and I can still see it. And when I messaged that brand, really not a year, but about 8 months later, the following winter, the brand was able to see that thread. So the notion of being able to go back to like an image that your friend sent you, and then having that same dynamic with the business is pretty compelling, and can't really happen on any other channel. I can't think of where else that happens. Maybe you go back to an email from somebody, sure, but.
Well, we expected it to happen in phone, right? We expect to call up, get an agent, and say, "But I just talked to another agent."
It doesn't work like that.
It just doesn't happen that way, and I think it is really cool. Another, other examples, real quick, because we're out of time, is the hotel asks for your loyalty number. Well, the next time they've already got it in the thread there, right? They don't have to ask for it again, and so I think that stuff really helps the service conversation, become a simpler, more seamless transaction. So
for sure,
love it, Jason. We could talk all day here, and I love what you guys are doing, and really appreciate your insights. I think this is a very, very interesting space, and guys, if you're not doing messaging yet with your customers, you got to start thinking about it. You got to start working with a company like a Conversational to explore the different options, because this is not going away. This is definitely how people are communicating. And what I love specifically about it is it's not about one channel. It's not anybody saying, "Oh, you really got to be on Snapchat," or "You really got to be on TikTok." It's about a broader sense for how we communicate in many channels. And that's why all of these social networks now have private chatting, because they all sort of realized the same thing. And I think what's nice, certainly from what I remember working with Conversational, is you kind of set it up once and it works across all these channels. So you don't really feel like you have to set up 17 different use cases for 17 different channels as we continue to get more and more social channels. Anyway, Jason, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your insights. Great to talk to you.
Likewise, we always consider you a bird of a feather when it comes to messaging and customer experience. So thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Proud to be among that flock. So next week, I am excited to bring another great person to the show. This is Shauna Hughes, and Shauna is the Global Product Growth and Innovation Evangelist for Momentive AI. You may know it as SurveyMonkey. They used to be called SurveyMonkey and just changed their name. And Shauna and I love to joke about the fact that I used to have her hair and don't anymore. So I'm always envious when I look at her, although she doesn't have the blue anymore. So sad to say. But anyway, Shauna is going to be with us next week. I hope you will join us. It will be another great show. Thank you for being here. I mentioned before my book coming out September 14th, The Experience Maker. I want to give you the link to theexperiencemakerbook.com. If you go on there, we'll direct you to the Amazon link, but then you just put your order number in and you get all the bonuses for pre-ordering. Really, really appreciate it. You're going to love this book. And when you pre-order, Amazon puts it on your doorstep on the day it comes out. So September 14th, you will be among the first to have it. All right, I'm Dan Gingiss. I am a customer experience speaker, coach, author, and podcaster. It's been great hanging out with you today. Thank you for joining me. I'm back next Thursday and every Thursday, 11 Central, noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. We'll see you next week on the Experience Maker Show. Take care.